I'm George Capellos, Professor of Architecture and Chair of the Ryerson University Department of Architectural Science Lectures Committee, and I will be hosting this afternoon's lecture. On behalf of our department chair, Mark Orgolewski, and our dean, Tom Duver, I'd like to welcome you to Ryerson University and the first of our lectures for 2020-21. Established in 1948, Ryerson's history is rooted in innovative, career-driven education with the goal of addressing contemporary societal needs. We began as a post-secondary institute designed to combine technical education with academic theory for the first time. Our department is home to an undergraduate program in architectural science and graduate programs in architecture and building science. And during the period of the COVID pandemic, we are operating virtually. And today's lectures is one of the many activities we are holding to support student learning and outreach into the professional and lay communities. We hope that when the pandemic is over, we will be able to see you in person here in our building. Ryerson sits on lands what is now known as Toronto, but these lands have been inhabited for millennia by many Indigenous nations and peoples. Toronto is in the dish with one spoon territory. The dish with one spoon is a territory between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to serve and share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. And in this spirit, we welcome you to our university and department today. Today's lecture will be given by the distinguished Dutch architect Francine Houben, who I will introduce shortly. This event is sponsored by the Consulate General of the Kingdom of Netherlands in Toronto. And since 2017, Anne Le Guellec has been the Consul General of the Kingdom of Netherlands here in Toronto. A Dutch and French national, Anne is a trained lawyer and holds honors degrees in European law from the Université François Rabelais in Tours, France, and from Leiden University in Leiden, the Netherlands. I don't speak any Dutch, so I'm introducing you in English. And I've had personal opportunity to be with Anne at a number of public events, and we're so pleased that you're here. We are very grateful, Anne, for the support of the Dutch Consulate General. And it's my pleasure to invite you, Anne, as the Consul General in Toronto, to say a few words of welcome to us all. Thank you.
Yes, can you hear me? Okay, thank you very much, George. Dank u wel. Hello, everyone, and welcome to you all in Canada and abroad. Goedemiddag in Nederland. As George said, and as you may know, have the chance to represent the Kingdom of the Netherlands here in the beautiful city of Toronto for 3 years already. And together with my team, as well as my colleagues across Canada in Vancouver and Ottawa, we have the great mission to foster collaborations between our two countries, share best practices, and inspire each other. Guided by the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, our economic diplomacy activities are focused on 5 themes, and architecture and designs are 2 of the priorities we try livable and sustainable city in the world, but of course in the GTA as well. And the reason why I'm so happy to have the chance to work with you, George and Alexandra, and all your team for so many years to promote Dutch design. As you all know, Dutch architecture had played a very important role in the international discourse on architecture in 3 eras. The first one was a few years ago during the 17th century, when the Dutch Empire was at the height of its power, the Golden Age. The second was in the first half of the 20th century, during the development of modernism. And the third is right now. It involves many contemporary Dutch architects who are achieving global prestige. And Francine Houben is one of them, a female, very important, modern architect who creates buildings where people want to live in. But I believe, George, you will explain what she do and what she does and who she is. So please enjoy this very inspiring lecture on poetry, I believe. And the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. We are indeed grateful for your presence and support. Dank u wel, and thank you and your staff for participating in today's event. Before I introduce our speaker, I would like to briefly describe the afternoon's program. This lecture is being delivered through a Zoom webinar. Our speaker has agreed to address any questions or comments from the audience. Therefore, you, the audience, are invited to post questions and comments that you may have for our speaker through the webinar link. Our panelists, faculty member Carlo Parente and second-year architectural science student Kira Phillips, will receive and monitor questions. At the conclusion of Ms. Houben's talk, I'll turn the podium over to Professor Parente for the discussion. At the close of discussions, Kira Phillips will say a few words of appreciation to our speaker on behalf of our students and faculty. I'll then conclude the session and invite you all to our next lecture in November. Now, to our guest, Francine Houben. Francine Houben is the founding partner and creative director of Mecanoo, External Link Architekten. Her work ranges from theaters, museums, and libraries to neighborhood housing and parks. Her practice has gained international acclaim. Some of Mecanoo's selected works include the Delft Library of Technology, the Delft University Library of Technology, La Lolita Theater and Congress Center in Leiden, the Library of Birmingham, and the National Kaohsiung Center for the Arts in Taiwan. Currently, she is working on the renovations of the New York Public Library and the Central Library of Washington, and she's with us today from Washington, D.C. In 2015, Queen Maxima of the Netherlands presented her with the prestigious Prince Bernhard Cultuurfonds Prize for her entire oeuvre. We are delighted to welcome you to Ryerson University, Francine Houben. I understand that your lecture has been pre-recorded and that you will be available afterwards for a few remarks. And I will welcome you now. Do you wish to say anything at the moment? Unmask yourself. You're muted. There she is.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, I'm now in the Afro-American Museum of David Adjaye here in DC, and I have to wear a mask, so I'm sitting here on the bench. So they every time come to me that I should wear a mask, but I will bike then after in between when I give the lecture, what was pre-recorded, because I thought that would be more interesting for you than that it's not just a Zoom lecture that by like me sitting behind a computer. So I hope you will enjoy that. And it's a lecture that was taken, I recorded it at my own home in the Netherlands. And I will be back with you for Q&A, but then I will be sitting in the Martin Luther King Library. What is an amazing library. I just had the opportunity to see it since the last 6 months. It was opened some weeks ago. I'm very proud of it.
Well, thank you.
I hope to come because maybe as you know, we're working on the Trinity College in Toronto. So I hope to visit, and we're now selecting bricks and materials for Trinity. So I hope to come soon again to Toronto.
Very good. Well, we'll look forward to seeing you in Toronto, and we're looking forward to your talk. We'll catch you later at the Q&A. Thank you.
Okay.
I did prepare a lecture for you from my home to you, and it's called People, Place, Purpose and Poetry. And I will explain you why. First, I want to tell you that one other book I did write 15 years ago was Composition, Contrast, Complexity, CCC. And that was much more about architectural composition, how to deal with formal language, how to create landscape and architecture, how do you combine that. But People, Place, Purpose is much more about the philosophy about how to what kind of attitude you should have as an architect to architecture. Because in architecture schools, or even maybe also in commissions, we are very much purpose-driven. But I learned, I've been now working for more than 30 years, that purpose is always changing. Of course, purpose is important, but be prepared for predictable and unpredictable changes. place is extremely important. Place is a place of culture, it's a place of landscape, it's a place of climate. In a very sustainable way, the place, the climate is extremely important. It's totally different if I do a concept for architecture in Taiwan or in the US or in the Netherlands, because it's always totally different. And then people. People come for me at the very first place. People all over the world with their senses, about seeing, about touching, about smelling, about hearing. The very important issues that acoustics is very important in architecture, that daylight is very important in architecture, how things smell, how you can touch and feel a building, and how you experience it when you walk through a building with that movement. But also the human values, that you want children to grow up in a healthy environment, that you want to take care of the elderly. And many of these kind of human values are for me extremely important. So people, place and purpose, in that order. When the book People, Place, Purpose was published, a very good friend of mine said, Francine, I think you should add another word to it. You should add also the word poetry to people, place and purpose, because I think your work is very poetic. So because of him, I added also poetry to it. And now I'll show you some of these projects. First of all, Mecanoo is based in Delft, the Netherlands, because I was a student at the Technical University in Delft at the Faculty of Architecture, and I won already competitions with some of my friends when I was still a student. So I'm really a startup from the Technical University in Delft. It's where we did design the library, the famous library in Delft. We did also the whole campus plan, changing it in a landscape. We are based, Delft is a very historical city. We are based in this building, but some parts of that building is more than 500 years old. We also have small satellite offices in New York and in Taiwan. And we've done buildings, and I will focus today on that, all kind of public buildings all over the world. And they all look different. And why do they look different? Because of people, place and purpose. These are, it's what I call my symphony orchestra. These are the Mecanoos. They come from all over the world. We are a very multidisciplinary office. We have architects, we have landscape architects, urbanists, more technical architects, graphic designers, filmmakers, and all together we make music, what we call architecture. I'm very much interested in time and transition. So maybe my next book will be time, transition. Maybe somebody has a suggestion for another T, that get TTT. But this is, for me, fascinating. This is 1969. This is the Technical University in Delft. This was the zeitgeist of the 60s. A new university, all over the world new universities were built, with the future was about cars, about endless growth. And this is what we did in 2012, a picture in 2012. We made the library, what is almost a combination of architecture and landscape. We turned this very car-oriented university into a park with a campus, with hills, in a very sustainable landscape. That transition is for me extremely interesting and fascinating, and what I see as a very important task on my shoulders. This is the library of the Technical University in Delft. And it's still the icon of the university. An icon of sustainability, of green engineering, and bringing people together. This moment I'm working in transitions, but also on a big scale. I'm not only an architect, I'm also an urbanist. And most recently, we made a plan for the southern part of the city of Rotterdam. What is 50% of the city? It's about 200,000 people, but it also has the big harbor. And we wanted to create a new perspective on it. This is the city of Rotterdam, this is south, and this is the area where we did concentrate on. It's where the former harbors used to be. And I had the feeling that the harbor and the city were not connected with each other anymore. And I was thinking, it's an area, most of the area is in a rather poor area, a lot of people without jobs. And I was thinking, next to this area is the harbor of Rotterdam. They're trying to find people who want to work in the harbor. So how is it possible to have here a lot of people that have no jobs, and here is an area that are looking for people for their jobs? And how can I bring them together? I was talking to many people in a very informal way. The boss of the harbor, the boss of the city, but also with just people in the street. And try to understand what are the problems and why it's working like this. I tried to understand what was the transition in this area, also in a historical way. That harbors are made, often even by hand. It used to be earth, and they digged it out for an industry to create space for ships. And also at that time, recreation and living and the harbor were very much combined. Also transition in mobility. They created in 37-42 a tunnel from north to south of Rotterdam. And that was a very important connection between these parts of the city. But also what happened in the Netherlands, and I think that's why it's so interesting in transition, is we had flooding in the Netherlands in 1953. And that's of course flooding and climate change is a very big issue now. And what we had to do, because here you see the flooding of the streets, we had to create a dike system. Here you can see it on that map in Rotterdam. But you can see that the dike is really in between what the neighborhoods are, where the people live, and the harbor. And it created a kind of barrier between the neighborhoods and the harbor. So how can we integrate in a much more positive way this dike? And I took this as a symbol. Imagine here is the harbor and here are the neighborhoods. Can we create an enormous dike park to bring these two areas together? So that's what we did. This is where the dike is, 10 kilometers of dike. And we said, imagine if that would be become a linear park. What is very good, it brings people together. It's good for your health, it's good about movement. We can make cycle paths, walking paths there. It's very essential for biodiversity, because nowadays biodiversity is a big issue on the planet. But also all the cities are dealing with what we call in the Netherlands heat stress. Getting it too hot. The cities are sometimes 6, 7, 8 degrees Celsius. More warm than what's happening outside the city. And it's really too hot for the people living there. And also realize mobility is into transition. It's not only subways and streetcars and trains. We have super buses and all kinds of different new forms of mobility, and we should integrate them in the urban planning on a bigger scale of cities. So I suggested to get through the tunnel, because the subway is not possible through the tunnel, and use the superbus to connect north and the south of Rotterdam. I can talk for many more hours about these ideas, but I just want to tell you that on the shoulders, we as architects, it's very important to think about transition, about time, but also in an integral way. So the plans we made for Rotterdam South, it's about education, because this part of the city didn't have enough education. It's about the new industry the maker industry. It's about how to deal with the dikes and the water management. It's about connecting mobility with new forms of mobility. It's about getting the city much more green and more biodiverse. It's very much also about the energy transition, what is a big issue in the Netherlands and in Europe. And how to deal with jobs and the knowledge economy. And of course, at the end, we do this for the young generation. We want to give them a new perspective for jobs, for health, for education. Another scale of transition is the transition of existing buildings. The most recent design we made was for the transition of the Museum Boijmans van Beuningen in Rotterdam. A collection of buildings that was built in the 30s and in the 60s and in the 80s and even in 2000. And what we did is to analyze all these different buildings, this whole complex, and to make a new addition to it, because it was not working. It was like a labyrinth, but an unpleasant labyrinth. Why I want to mention this? Because for me it's very essential. It's for me the combination of my two books. Composition, Contrast and Complexity, about composition of architectural languages, and People, Place, Purpose, how I want to give the audience, the visitors of the museum, an experience to open up this museum and also to make it very a place for all, that everybody feels welcome, that also a museum and even old libraries don't feel just for the elite. Here I just show you some images. This is a building of the 30s, this one. This building is a building of the 60s, and in between we make a kind of organic, almost like a very linear pavilion, a new entrance to the museum. This new route through the building is an access-free route. You don't need a ticket for this. And here, how also for me is always interesting also time transition in a different way. But for me, it's even interesting how you experience a building at daytime or in the evening. In the evening is much more dealing with artificial light, and it's a different kind of stage the museum becomes, and how you can use the outdoor space. And here how we make the connection to the park, the museum park, what is behind the museum. But also I can imagine that this is also an experience as part of the museum that touches all your senses. For me it's about sound, it's about light, about artificial light. And here also what happens at daytime and what happens at nighttime, and how it can be used as a public space, as an important public space in the city. Of course, this is the COVID-19 period, and what we have learned from this is how important it is to create healthy public spaces where people can meet each other. And the Museum Park in Rotterdam should be very much part of this. Now I go back to my people, place and purpose and poetry story. I will show you some projects that are realized. The first one is in Delft, the city where the office is based. There used to be on a viaduct, and I used to live here as a student, an elevated train, what really divided the city in two parts. If you create a railway station in Delft, I want to see it as the living room for the people of Delft. Or if visitors, because it's also a touristic city, that they really feel, hey, I'm entering Delft. It's not just the same station as all the stations in the Netherlands. The special thing about this railway station is that we had to combine it with the municipal offices of the city. Delft is a very historical city. It's a city of the painter Vermeer, but it's also the city of innovation. So it's history and innovation, because it's innovation of the Technical University of Delft. And how can I combine these two identities into that building? And at the same time, I want to do it in a timeless way. I cannot design something that is maybe nice now, but not nice anymore in 10 years' time or 20 years' time. Very important that we wanted to make it a four-sided building. that we did analyze the flow of people. Where is it as a mobility hub with the cars, no, not with the cars, with the bikes, with the streetcars, with the buses and the trains, how will that function? It's also the city of the Delft blue china. So this was this first idea, can you imagine to make a whole hall with Delft blue china tiles? Another thing what we did really love, the painter Vermeer is famous for his use of light. And I always say the light in Delft is so beautiful. And it's a city of canals and little alleys. And we said, imagine we take this piece of a city with the beautiful light and we put it on top of here. And we take it as an inspiration of the floor plan of the municipal offices on top of the railway station. So we have what we call the canal with a wider space. And we have more narrow alleys what bring in the daylight to the offices. So it's really with these patios cut out, but we also closed it at the end because we wanted to have it as one building, and we did clad it totally with glass. And always we took this historical and innovation, made always a kind of combination. So this is high-tech glass, but this is kind of looks like a handmade glass. Behind this glass is a shadow box. So no daylight gets through it. It's a skin. Here you can see that. In the morning it's different than in the evening or at day because the way it reflects, it's really, I think, very beautiful. This was our idea about the hall, the train hall, the renderings we made. And we had this idea first of the cladding of all the tiles, but the cladding of the tiles was not possible. Acoustics would be terrible, but also for the flexibility of the change of installations, you have to be prepared for unpredictable and predictable changes in train stations. So we started to work with baffles. We did analyze what is exactly Delft blue, how it is made, how we can play with it. We put together with a graphic designer, the map of Delft with the whole region around it. And we started to play because this map is maybe this size. But the building is 120 meters long. How can I give this interpretation? You cannot just blow it up. We tested it in 3D. And also the experience that if you walk this way, it looks different than you walk that way because of the baffles that go vertical. The other thing we did is test, here you see in the office, just to demolish tiles, put them together and testing how that would work. To be honest, I think for us to be an architect is materializing dreams. And I always enjoy to go to the building site to look how people make it and can make it. And you can see also these people are very proud of what they are doing. Here again you see how it is by evening, how you enter it and how you experience it. Best you see it when you see this movie.
Spoor 1. En de eerstvolgende sprinter naar de Duits Centraal vertrekt om 15 uur van spoor 1.
This is Birmingham, second city in the UK. It's a city always in transition. Where you see this red angle, it's the place where nowadays is the library. But here you can see that also every 10 years they make another master plan. This was in the 1951. And in 2008 they wanted to combine the theatre with a new library. They wanted to have the library as the social heart of the city. So they did combine a library with a city archive, a business and learning center, a gallery, the Shakespeare Memorial Room, and the repertory theatre, and a new studio theatre. What the people in the office did, Mecanoo did, is to make a collage. The way I did walk from my hotel, I discovered here is the theatre, the repertory theatre. We made a collage of all the buildings next to each other. And you can see all these different zeitgeists just next to each other. Every 10 years another architecture, a rhythm of different architectures. So it became a city of incidents and fragmentation. And I said we should try to create much more a coherent, bring it together. And these were the first sketches we made. We said we want to make the Library of Birmingham almost a dynamic journey. I just don't want to have floors on top of each other, but it should feel that you can make a journey through the building and end somewhere. But even I wanted to go down in the ground and even come up in the square. I also was looking at, what are the materials of the city? It has limestone, it has red bricks, it has blue bricks. There's a lot of steel. It has craftsmanship. It's the city with the jewelry district, already a 200 years tradition to make jewelry. But I also went to the cathedral and I was impressed by the window and the shadow working on the floor. And I started to play with that. Because I thought the building should fit in the architectural rhythm of the city. So this was the concept we made. We keep the building from the 20s. It has a monument in front of it. This was the building of the theatre of the 70s. We could combine the theatre with a library. We said, in a way, it's nice. It has a very beautiful auditorium. Let's keep this building and restore it. And in between, we made the Library of Birmingham. So we said it's 3 palazzos with 3 different zeitgeists with 3 different kinds of materials. Setting it back to create green roofs for outdoor, almost urban farming, you would call it nowadays, but also with a sunken patio. What we did, as I told you, it also has an archive, a very important archive with a beautiful collection. But we decided together with the chief librarian, not to put it in the basement, but to put it high up, for 2 reasons. If you have an archive, you want people to see it and you want people to use it. Another thing what was important, that we wanted most of the people to stay very close to street level. So we did introduce street level, mezzanine level. We created a huge lower ground floor, but also a mid-lower ground floor and a mid-lower ground floor. So it's very much a walkable building. So the big flow of people is here, and the higher up you go into the building is more research-oriented. The BREEAM Excellent, the rotundas, this idea of the rotundas was also the basis for the whole sustainability strategy. So it has a mixed mode ventilation system, very good in Corona times. It was very much designed from within. As I told you, Birmingham was not that beautiful yet. So I wanted to create, like what I saw in the cathedral, a circular pattern that gives beautiful shadows inside the building. And here you see this whole cladding and this idea of the building. Here's the golden box with the archive, and on top is the Shakespeare Memorial Room. Children library in the lower ground floor. It's really like a library in a library. Outdoor space, where it's also the music department, where you can have performances. Here you can see that's happening. At lunchtime you can have an informal presentation here. The book rotundas with the escalators going through it. It's really the heart of the building. And at the end you can see the daylight. The orientation with perimeter seating along the windows. Many different learning environments. There's not one way of studying. Everybody is different. You can work in groups, individually. You can work in a very silent way, or you love to be in a noisy area, or you want to look at many people. The gardens, we really want to show people. A lot of children even don't know anymore that an apple comes from a tree, so it was also had a very educational. It was very much also an educational idea at that time. Art gallery, British Film Institute is also in the building, so you can watch movies. Going up through the book rotunda, here to the research department. So you can see the ceiling. Here above is the golden box with the archive. Going up, seeing the stars. Looking back, I always love this picture, this moment in the building. And the Shakespeare Memoriam, what was an existing interior that we took from an old library from Birmingham and put it on top of the building, and it really became a destination. This movie shows very well the whole happiness and use of the library, and how you see it as a sequence of spaces.
In the whole of Europe. I can't tell you how proud I am of that.
It's just a fantastic experience.
And it's such a good library, you need to go.
Oh, I'm just awestruck. It's absolutely fantastic.
It looked like more like Harry Potter, you know, when they go from one floor to another without walking or the stairs. It looked like that.
The ring feel to it, you know, like you've got the bull rings, you've got the circle of life, the circle of knowledge, you know.
But look, it's very big and there's loads of circles around it.
It's got all the areas, totally different library, very modern, and I say totally different to when I was little.
I think it's wonderfully laid out and very approachable.
I'm just doing some college work because it's easier doing it in a library than at home, because down here it's just a work environment.
I love the idea, the concept of just going into an archive section that represents the old library as well. You know, the Shakespeare library is just absolutely fantastic.
I quite liked the I don't know what it's called, the big circular bookcase down there, like there's the room and you turn around and there are all the books around it. Yeah, I really liked that.
The teenagers, definitely, I think it would be nice to come in and study, because they can go off and go and grab a coffee and then go back to their work, and then they can have a walkabout outside.
Downstairs was fabulous, you know, just the idea of just having, you know, places where kids can sort of lie, because that's how they read.
I really like the garden and stuff, because if you're in a work environment, you need like nature really.
When I'm older, when I become a dentist, and I'm going to be studying in the library, and it's going to be really fun.
Because it's this amazing, I would come here more often, like a lot.
This is really nice, it's outstanding. I like it, definitely.
It's nice to make a step from Birmingham, what was an industrial city, to Tilburg, a small provincial city in the Netherlands, just 100 kilometers south of Rotterdam, also with an industrial background. It's next to the railway station, the site. Tilburg is also the city of textile. This is a picture, it's a very exciting picture from 1935. In this hall, next to the railway station, the Dutch National Rail Company used to maintain their locomotives. Here you can see, so the construction was very strong. Here you see a floating locomotive to repair. This hall was still there. It was always the intention to demolish it, because the economic period, when there was the very bad economic period, like what was it, 10 years ago, they just kept it. And this was the space. It was, you know, imposing space, a lot of steel. They decided to bring a library in it, but not only the library. They did combine it with the offices for arts of the whole province and seats to meet, what is a kind of WeWork concept in the Netherlands. And to bring it all together in that building. We are not the architect of the whole building, of the restoration of the building. We are the architect. Mecanoo was selected to be the architect of the interior of it. And what we did is that we wanted to use the identity of that old LocHal, we called it Locomotive Hall. So this is how you can see what we did. We call this the straat, the street, and we made little tables along these big columns. Another thing what we did, there was still the railroad tracks, and we asked that we would love to have some wheels and to make tables on top of it. And imagine these tables, the 3 enormous tables. If you just move it like this, with one hand you can move them. And here there's an enormous amount of stairs in the building. It's for informal sitting and studying, but also if there's an event, you can use it like this. The cafe, when you enter, also made in a kind of informal way with a big sign on top of it, what we used as a light bulb almost, the LocHal. It's enlightened, it gives light, with a kind of colorful tiles. The curtains that were designed by Petra Blaise from inside outside, they are very important because Tilburg is a city of textile. And she worked together with the Textile Museum. If you ever have the chance to go to Tilburg, visit this building, but also visit the Textile Museum. And they made these beautiful curtains that can move and can change the space. We did also design the children department of the library. We did get inspiration from the theme park. It's a famous theme park next to Tilburg. It's called the Efteling. It's very much about storytelling. So we did exaggerate in scale certain elements. Events, stacking podia with glued books. This is a room where you can write your own book. So we even did glue all the books around us. It's real books that are not used anymore. You can play with the tables, you can sit alone, you can make it in a collective way. There's a game lab for the teenagers in here. There's a DG lab and a future lab and maker space. Very much oriented for children. Okay, let's go to the US. Washington, D.C. I Have a Dream. Martin Luther King. It's about the historical map of Washington. And it's on this point where the Martin Luther King Memorial Library is designed by Mies van der Rohe. It was a competition, a building designed by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, named after Martin Luther King. To make it the library of the future was for me very much an emotional loaded task on my shoulders. It was a journey. We even made a documentary about it, the whole research we did. Let me show you that first. Het is een gebouw van Mies van der Rohe die de naam draagt van Martin Luther King en de Bibliotheek van de Toekomst. Die 3 aspecten, dat ben ik nog helemaal aan het uitzoeken, hoe dat nou moet.
Martin Luther King, he is a man that represents a struggle for all colors of people.
The fact that this building in this place, at the time that this building was opened, just a few years after the assassination, is a real powerful and incredible legacy and history lesson that we shouldn't lose sight of.
Mooie proporties. Dan kom je daar in een soort Mecanoo-wereld die afgesloten is van Mies.
I never heard him say less is more. He's quoted as saying that, but I never heard him say that. But he would say, we'll reduce it till it's almost nothing.
Maar je kan toch zien dat echt alles wat hij ook zegt, alles is uitgezet op de maat van de stenen. En dit is die verschrikkelijke enge ervaring. Je ziet het hier ook. Hier, dat zie je allemaal aan het hoesten is. We moeten die gevel vernieuwen.
One architectural critic some years ago called this a soul-crushing black cube. And I understand what he was talking about, really.
Alle boeken die staan in het daglicht en de mensen die zitten zonder daglicht. En dat is een hele rare tegenstelling. Weet ik niet, staat het nou in de allereerste originele tekeningen, staan dan ook al die muren er al in of niet? Mies die maakt eigenlijk altijd hele eindeloze horizontale ruimtes. Die stopt hij met een verticaal vlak. Maar ik vind toch dat die muur weg moet. Daarmee wordt de bibliotheek zichtbaarder en dat maakt het gebouw veel publieker.
Anything to change the appearance of this building. Yes. I'm all on board.
I think Mies expected and appreciated wonderful things to happen within his structure.
Imagine, these are these old pictures. Imagine you as a kid, and do you think you're entering a library? Do you think this feels very welcome? It was maybe more to pick up a book and you were not really invited to walk up the stairs. A very simple building with 4 cores. This was the entrance, 2 staff, 2 public. It was horrible stairs. And what we did, if we say where you entrance the building, we make 2 public stairs, and this part will become for staff and loading. So first serving the audience, that was very important for us. And then we said it's very much a walkable building. It has just a street level and then 1, 2, 3 floors, and we will introduce a new level. So let's celebrate into these public cores beautiful organic stairs to invite people to walk up and to explore all the activities in the building. The idea was also very much that we keep clear what is Mies and what is Mecanoo. So this idea that even we did change the inside of these 4 cores and we added a pavilion. But imagine that in the future you don't like us anymore, you can take us away and then you have Mies again. It's a kind of philosophy in restoration. Here you can see the elements, what we did. 2 cores for the public, back of house and a pavilion on top of it. And the opening of that corner. These are the main elements we did, and I would also add that we created a grand reading room. Here you see the concept of the walkable, the stairs, the social stairs. Of course they're great now in COVID-19 terms, because you don't need to take the elevator, you can keep distance to each other and you can just walk. This is how the rooftop was of the building. And we decided to make it into a little park, a city park, around us, with the pavilion on top of it. And here you can see, if you take the roof away, over 2 floors, a new theater space, an auditorium. Because if you think of Martin Luther King, the spoken word was so important for him. So to have a space to celebrate the spoken word was extremely important in the programming of the whole building. Here you see that space. This was what we did to make a cut out of 1 floor to make a grand reading room. Because that was really a longing of the people of DC. Another thing, what we did, and we struggled a lot and had a lot of discussion about it, this was the corner of 9th Street and G Place. But it was horrible. There was a lot of things happening in this building that you don't want to happen in a public building or any building. So we managed to take this one away and to open it up. So then here you have an outdoor space, what is still very Miesian. It's stopped by this wall. There is a height difference between the street and this level. That you get an outdoor space that you can program again or sit outside. I cannot wait that it will be filled with people, and I cannot wait to see it myself. From DC to New York, I think it was 1 or 2 years later, we started to work on the New York Public Library. What was also extremely interesting, of course, Midtown New York, the famous building. What is interesting for me was the experience that the building in Washington was not that much loved by the people of Washington, D.C. But in New York, this is maybe the most loved building in New York. But it really needed a renovation. It's this building by Carrera and Hastings from 1917, so it's more than 100 years old. Beautiful building, and people love it. But it's not working as a library, as a public library that well anymore. And of course, behind it is Bryant Park. And here you see where used to be, or still are, the stacks. The whole building, the concept of this is the Rose Main Reading Room, and it's on top of the stacks of the building. That's very crucial in the whole concept of this building. So if you want to take away the stacks, you have a structural problem. But also because the collection of this building, it's really like an archive, to keep it climatized, to have no daylight in, to have much more flexibility in the stacks. So the whole stacks didn't work that well anymore for such a research collection as the New York Public Library has in this building. And of course on top is this beautiful Rose Main Reading Room, what was also recently restored. New York Public Library Midtown Campus is not only about this building and how to update this building, it's also about the building across the street. Because you can consider this as the research library, that building, but this is the biggest circulating library building of New York. It's the building across. And how to balance these two buildings in combination, even what I said, with Bryant Park and a small pocket park over here. You can see here I'm standing in front of the Central Library looking, this must be like 6 years ago, to the Mid-Manhattan Library. That was the name, MML. Of course, it was never designed as a library, it was designed as a department store. And it has this floor plan, and it has here what I call the long arm or long leg. And it has a small pocket park in between here. It has no windows, this whole arm. The Central Library across is a kind of step-by-step renovation, and we don't close the building. But here we close the building and we do a good renovation. So, but we had to deal with the existing facade and the existing construction, what had an enormous amount of columns. Also, there was a big discussion about books, because they have in between 400 and 600,000 books. And people, it was almost like a political or social fight that there should be enough books in the library. So then we came up with this idea. As I told you, it's such a strange building. We said, what if we make a hole in here, a void, and we call this what I called the long room. So this is what we did. We made a cut here, what I just explained, to create the long room. So here are 3 floors, and here we created 5 floors. So here we have an enormous amount of book collection, what is accessible for everybody. Where the main entrance is on 5th Avenue, we have more, also a mezzanine level with grab and go. In the lower ground floor, we made 2 voids for a teenage area and a children's library. And on the 7th floor, we called what I did call the wizard head on top of the building to create a momentum where everybody wants to go with an outdoor terrace. Again, free for all public, no ticket or no consumption needed, and where you can give lectures. Here you see it's still renderings. I hope we can soon update it because it's finished, the building. It would have been opened last May. Because of COVID, they could not open it. It's now a little bit, you can go there just to go to the ground floor for grab and go. The void, here you see it, how it was under construction. And then here there was the existing roof with a view to SASB and 5th Avenue, and how this became a public terrace with a little bit elevated the conference area, so you can oversee better over the parapet, but also make a kind of informal sitting element for people to sit. On top of the Mid-Manhattan Library, what is now called the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Library, we designed a wizard hat. And the wizard hat was inspired by the Beaux-Arts buildings around us. Realized that the Central Library and this building is maybe just 5 years in between. It's from the same period. But also these buildings around us, so you can see they always have a kind of special ending roof. And that's what we also did with this building. Okay, let's go from New York to Taiwan, to Kaohsiung, second city, harbor city. A project we've been working on for 12 years. So I started this in 2006 and I had never been to Taiwan. It's really nice there. What I really like about Taiwan and especially about Kaohsiung, again this harbor city, this second city, it's subtropical, tropical cities. It gets dark at 6, very quick, and then everybody comes out and eats in the streets, do informal performances in the street. So it's a very pleasant, welcoming, informal city. It's also a very cultural country. And this was an important inspiration for us because we were asked, it was a competition for a huge performing arts center, combining opera with music and theater. And we also went to Chinese opera, but you have to realize that Chinese opera from originally is a street theater. It's an outdoor performance. This is a picture I made myself in Taiwan. And I always love this picture, like people sitting on plastic chairs, but even on a scooter. The site was on a former military compound, a big one, almost 800 by 800 meters. And I remember there coming for the very first time, and I remember barking dogs, many barracks, because it's military, and banyan trees. And the banyan tree became our inspiration. Tropical tree, it grows and it continues. You see here the formal language of the roots. In between is this space to catch the wind, to cool you down. And on top of it is a continuous roof of the leaves, the crown, but protects you from the rain and the sun. If I look at the country and try to understand the country, I often look at the trees because they say something about the climate and the soil. Here you see what's happening. I think it's beautiful. This was our concept. What we did, the idea of the banyan trees, we transformed it in a huge performing arts center. We created a huge canopy. The concert hall, a lyric theater, a recital hall and a playhouse and an open air theater. We put it all underneath as one single identity under one roof. And where the roof touches the park, it becomes the open air theater. That was the idea. And very important that it was open air. So in between these auditoria, there was open air. Really the wind could blow like underneath the banyan trees. On the right hand side, here you see the scheme. You see the music, it was the concert hall and the recital hall. Left hand side is the playhouse and in the middle is the combination of spoken work and music is the opera house. This is the opera house and also important that we go up. It's almost like we call it an acoustic landscape because we go up to have the back of house area underneath us. Testing the acoustic model. Albert Xu was our acoustician. This is the concert hall. The opera house, it has a scenery transfer system, a huge fly tower. It was a very good construction. So to deal with all technical aspects of a performing arts center, was of course very important. It's also symbolic how we did study how to make the building, to be honest. In a way, we knew how to make these auditoria, we had good consultants, we knew how to do it, but how to deal what we called the banyan plaza with the banyan skin. And that was a journey because we said it's a big, big space, this banyan plaza. It's almost the size of an enormous ocean liner. And we tested what would happen if we do it all by tiles. And it was really beautiful, and we were also testing how it would change with light. And here you can see the texture of the tiles, how we did. But it didn't work. We didn't know how to make the ceiling, because in a wet climate the tiles were just coming down. So tiles was no option. We tested many other materials, aluminum, stucco, many materials. And at the end we came up, why not make it like a cargo ship? Maybe for two reasons. Because this is Kaohsiung, this is Taiwan. Kaohsiung is a harbor city. It has the ship industry is here. And they could make the skin, and they would love to make that skin. And they also knew how to organize it. It was one of our most amazing projects. Like for 12 years, but the construction to make this building was, every time we came to Taiwan, was amazing. Here I show you how it was made by the shipbuilding industry. And for them the biggest issue was how, because they could not handle it from above, they had to do it from bringing it up. As I told you, we really want to show the pattern of the welding, what gives a kind of texture to it, it gives it scale, and it gives it also identity. I love that. Very important for me, and it's almost emotional, that we were inspired by the local banyan trees, and at the end it was made by the local shipbuilding industry. And how beautiful is that for the idea of people, place and purpose. It's a big building, but it really fits into the park. This was just before the opening. The foyer space. Here you enter through the foyer and we go to the concert hall, this one. Here you see the concert hall in the beginning, and it's also again very organic, the way we did design it. Again, together with the acoustician Albert Xu. But also how we did design the two. It's a double organ. It's almost like two bamboo bushes in this very organic concert hall. And a lot of people, it's for about 2,000 people, but you feel very close to the musicians, and it's great acoustics. Here you see it, also how we did design the chairs and the colors. Here is the other music hall. This is the small concert hall. It's more asymmetric. It's for about 600 people. And asymmetric, it's nice because if you have a small audience, you keep that one dark. I mean, you're in a very intimate space. And also the idea was that as much people as possible can see the hands of the piano player. So that's why asymmetric is nice. But it's also very important for the acoustics that this is also reflecting and that's reflecting. And the playhouse. This is the most multifunctional space, okay, Mecanoo blue, where you can have, this one has the most flexibility of all auditorium of the Performing Arts Center. And the opera house with the balconies and with different shades of red. The fabric of all the chairs is made in the Netherlands. It's beautiful fabric. Here you can see it is custom woven by Leo Schellens. Different kinds of red, 4 colors of red, a blue and the gold yellow one. And here you can see what really makes me happy, how the building is used and very much loved by the public. How they have now informal yoga classes in our building. And it's all happening in the Banyan Plaza, having the movies. This is the belly of the outdoor theater facing the park. Here again you see that space and how it's ventilated. It's also, if you walk, you should all go to Taiwan, but if you walk there, you really feel the wind. It's really catching the wind of the ocean to cool you down. It's always pleasant. And here you see it from above with the outdoor theater facing for big events here. We did also the landscaping around the building. The building was opened now 2 years ago. It was extremely positive happening. It was So many people were there, and it is so well used by the city of Kaohsiung, but also the surrounding region. They really try to combine all forms of art into this building. Maybe it's nice to show you the grand opening. Become a true people's palace, especially designed for all people of Taiwan. Thank you, CCA.
我要特别感谢大家，特别感谢蔡总。
So this is people, place, purpose and poetry. I hope I did, with this lecture, I explained you my philosophy, but also I hope I gave you inspiration and also to show what important tasks are on your shoulders to think of the future of architecture, of landscaping, of urbanism, and even about the planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will now like to turn the program over to my colleague and friend Carlo Parente for questions and discussion with our distinguished guest.
Yes, thanks, George, and thank you, Francine, for such an inspiring lecture. We do have a few questions that our virtual audience has posted, and I'll read some of them to you. And I just encourage our virtual audience to continue to type your questions into the Q&A. So our first question is from Amanda, who is asking, when approaching a new project, how do you start your exploration of an unfamiliar city to uncover its key personality, challenges, and opportunities?
No, yeah, also like I'm now in DC, and I remember working for the thinking about the Martin Luther King Memorial Library. I really spent here several days trying to understand the city, staying in a hotel or an Airbnb or whatever. Really explore the city and observe the people and observe the climate and the seasons. And for this building, maybe it's nice for you to share. We made a documentary about my exploration of the Martin Luther King Memorial Library, what was maybe the most sensitive, one of my most sensitive projects, because it was dealing with Mies van der Rohe, but also with Martin Luther King, who is now here. I don't know, I'm sitting in a room now here in the library itself. And but I think it's good to share that with your students if you want. It's a 1-hour documentary. And there you can see what I did. We did an enormous amount of also academic research, but also finding out who was the original project architect, who turned to be still alive. We did talk to him. We did find the people who made the dream come through, that it was named after Martin Luther King. So it's so if you see that documentary, I think it tells you a lot.
Well, maybe tagging on to that question, I noticed that in the presentation you did mention the Mecanoo blue as kind of a signature color, but at the same time, I'd say your work does not have a signature style, which is what makes it so amazing. And I'm just wondering, for our students, how do you engage in the process of design? When you go back to the office after these explorations, how do you actually engage your team to start a project?
Yeah. It's not, it's funny, the Mecanoo blue, it came, I think the first one we did was maybe the library in Delft or the chapel in Rotterdam, or maybe the theater. But I think what happened to me, I did get involved since maybe 1995, 1998 into the theater world. And I like very much how they deal with stage design and light and natural light, but also artificial light. So I started, and often we had projects that had we did a lot of avant-garde projects for avant-garde theaters. And it also means that there's no money. So I had to really find out that sometimes I could just use paint, but then I use paint that is a kind of theater paint. So I started with the blue, but I also did the gold and the silver and mustard yellowish. So it's not just blue. I'm just in the library of Washington here. It's funny, we didn't have any blue, but then Zenobia Bailey came in. And she did design the ceiling of the Grand Reading Room here. And she made it Mecanoo blue, but that was just a coincidence. Yeah. But for me, color is like a material, and it's not a cheap paint. It's a special paint often.
We have another question about sustainability here. We have someone asking that, what way does sustainability play a role in the design process of Mecanoo? Is it, for example, a goal, a checklist, or is it hindering the architectural concept? Can it be linked to the norms of people, place, purpose, and poetry?
I think it's very much linked to that. For me, it's also not just ticketing the boxes. What is, if you look to the work we did for now more than 25 years time, maybe the first one was that really also has this image of a sustainable building was the library in Delft, where we really covered the whole roof, or we tilted almost the whole roof up like a piece of paper, and that became the grass. But it was also very sustainable, is to keep the collection and the archive of the books like wine, very stable. But it was really also symbolic, because at that time, sustainable architecture was all glass buildings. And as you all know, it's not good to make a glass building for sustainability reasons. But I think it's also for us very much part of to find out local materials. So it's not just ticketing to boxes. For me, it's very important at the end, it's about the health of people, but even the health of flora and fauna. Because I learned the last 5 years that biodiversity is extremely important to bring biodiversity into the city. So you can see, it's funny because you can't see it, but I can see here the roof we did in the Mart here in Washington. It's really amazing. It's so beautiful. But also what we did now for the Nederlandse Bank, the Dutch National Bank, we totally tried. It's also an existing building, but we tried to make it very not only sustainable about materials and energy bill, of course, but also thinking about the biodiversity. Biodiversity in the city, we should put much more attention to it, is my opinion. And it's also fun because you're now in Toronto. At this moment, we are researching, as you know, we're working on the Trinity College. And of course, we have discussion about facade, and it should be a center for excellence for sustainability. So we're also researching, the facade. Maybe use a brick, what is not a brick, but is rather local and it's not big. So we are, yeah. And it's also for me intellectually interesting to do research on sustainability. It gives me inspiration.
We have another question from an audience member that's looking at what you've discussed today as being very much about the social, contextual, and historical reasoning behind your approach, which they said is very good, towards creating human and friendly architecture. And they're asking, to what extent do you use architectural theory, philosophy, and how important that is in the decision-making of your process?
Yeah, of course, I studied at the Technical University Delft, and but for me, design is very much about analysis and intuition, I call it. So analysis, and of course also the academic discussion belongs to that. For instance, for this building, Martin Luther King Memorial Library, the building of Mies van der Rohe, we also asked the Technical University in Delft to do a really pure academic research on this building, because I want to be very sure that, and at the same time, we were doing it more in an observing and talking to people and finding the original architect and all these kind of original project architect. So this combination makes it very good. But for me, often, to be honest, can I say so, in university, the academic discourse is not always the same as my own discourse. Uh-oh.
No, I think that's...
But universities are also changing the way I observe it. I feel you have to realize, I did study in the 70s, and that was in the Netherlands a very time that the students were very much connected to society and even to politics. And a lot of architecture students went more into, there was no work. There was a big economic crisis, and they often became politicians or worked for a housing company or did not become architects. But I say, I want to be an architect, but I want to be helpful to be linked to society, that I want to work to be visionary for society. I want to serve the society, so that I think it was not a purely form-based academic discourse what I was involved in. And that, I think you can see it as a red line. Maybe you recognize that in the work of Mecanoo.
And maybe that's a good segue for our next question from one of our professors, Yuri, who is thanking you for an inspiring presentation. And he's asking, how do you actually engage the clients? So he's asking if you could tell us a little about your clients and the level of involvement in the project.
You know, architecture is not, for me, not autonomous art. And that's maybe almost often it was taught in architecture school like it's autonomous art. It's not. You really, the building is as good, the result is as good as the combination of the client and the architect and even the consultant. So for me, the client is of course extremely important, but it's also fun. It's a journey with them. It's often an adventure. They often select Mecanoo when they because sometimes these clients select an architect because they say, okay, I want to have a white building, or want a certain architectural style. But with us, it's always a little bit of a surprise what you get. So, no, we are very much working together with the client. But even again, because I'm now in the Martin Luther King Memorial Library, we did engage so much, not just with the librarians, but also with people of DC, because for them, you have to realize they don't care about Mies van der Rohe. They did care about Martin Luther King. And how could we, because this building was never designed, because it was named after Martin Luther King, but it was not designed to honor him. It was just the building was finished. Okay, who are we going? And now, in that period, maybe you would name it after George Washington or something like that. So it was already a big, big fight to get it named after him. And now I felt it the task on our shoulders to really make it now the Martin Luther King Memorial Library, with celebrating his values. But of course, me as an architect, I also wanted to respect Mies van der Rohe. I think, yeah, you should all go, if the pandemic is over, you should all go to DC and also to New York, because I think it's, I'm very proud of the work.
I think we're having some slight issues with sound, but our next question is, I think you ended with a comment about the pandemic, and I think it fell out a little bit. But the next question deals with the pandemic, and one of our audience members is asking, how do you anticipate how the current pandemic might affect design, especially when considering the relationship between people and places?
Oh yeah, the special thing for me is that, for instance, if you look to the both libraries, because I'm now, of course, a little bit focused because I was just in New York, I'm now in DC on these two libraries, but especially this library, what is such a generous, huge building with these beautiful monumental stairs, what we did design. So and it's very symmetrical, this building, so you really can have, and we make walkable buildings, what is quite unique in the US, even in Canada, I think. So it's walkable buildings. It has, both buildings has an outdoor space on top of the building where you can sit without a mask. You can really organize, although both buildings are now they did open the ground floor just for grab and go or picking up your books. But in a way, it's very well prepared. And also, I don't know if you saw the beautiful tables we made for what is now named the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Library. They have a distance. They're even bigger than the tables of the Rosemary Reading Room. So they are very well prepared. And also, they're very well made, both buildings. So good materials, because for me, it was always an issue together with my clients. It should be cleanable, because we have to be aware that in libraries, in these public buildings, you're not designing a villa. You're for one person, it is on the same chair is maybe sitting 5 different people a day, and how to clean the table, and hygiene has always been for me an important issue in the design we did for the libraries already for many years. So of course I didn't know that we would get a pandemic, but for me it's an issue. You could ask my clients, because they remember that I always said it. So I think we are very well prepared in these buildings, these two buildings. But even Birmingham also, I think, because for me it's very much about flow of people and the awareness that in these, especially these public buildings where you gather with a lot of people, they often come from different background with different issues on hygiene, and also be aware that I've worked quite a lot also in Taiwan, but it's also very much, anyway, even for the pandemic, and Hong Kong is very much aware of the essence of hygiene.
So
totally I think it will influence, I hope, in a positive way, our public space.
Yeah.
In my own city, Rotterdam, they closed off streets. All the restaurants are now closed again, but they are opened up public space. They took away the parking areas, and it became seating areas for restaurants. You can see how important the public parks are in the city, and that we even need more green. I even sometimes say, I think this whole pandemic, maybe our globe was protesting, that we were doing some things wrong. We have not, in the Netherlands, we had for 7 months now, beautiful skies, beautiful weather through the whole pandemic. and also if I'm in New York or in DC, the air is much cleaner. So it feels like every day like Sunday, but we should also listen to what we learned from the pandemic.
Yeah.
There are many good things. Of course, there are very bad things about it, but there's also many good things about it.
Yeah, I think every now and then when you're speaking, you're covering your microphone. Sometimes you're going in and out.
Okay, sorry for that. Oh, what I'm doing now.
That's fine. But from the very beginning, even before we started the lecture, we saw you walking around the museum, and you were making comments about various places. And I think the experience and the empirical knowledge that you gain from visiting a place seems to be very important in the work that you do. George actually asked a question here about, as you travel and visit a new place and perhaps a building site, how do you record your observations? Do you sketch? What digital media might you use? I see that many of the projects are recorded by film. Can you talk to us for our students about how they may get to know a place? I think you're muted now, Francine, sorry.
To speak, yeah? Can you hear me?
Yes.
But now I did put it on the table that I'm not holding it myself anymore, sorry. For me, it's really, I always have my little notebook, people know me, and my camera, and now it's more already, I bought 2 days ago an iPhone, but I of course I had an iPhone with the camera, but I always used to have a traditional camera. So I'm really observing, because you have to be aware, if you work internationally, I have to communicate, and maybe I'm traveling all alone, or maybe it's 1, 2, or 3 people from Mecanoo with me, but we have to communicate with the people we are talking to. But even with my clients, I show like, I've seen this, and what do you think of that? And it's often not about the aesthetics, but about the functioning of things. And I think we are now filming also for maybe 5, 6 years, I don't know exactly, or 8 years, maybe something like that. Because I think the first one we did was I think you should share it with your students, is it's Martin Luther, it's called a legacy of Mies and King. And because I won this competition in this building, and somebody in the Netherlands asked me, Francine, tell me, what is your most exciting project? I said, I would love to make a movie about this building. Because you have to realize it was a building of Mies van der Rohe, and when I did enter the building, it was full of homeless sitting in a Barcelona chair. And so I really, was for me amazing to discover this. It was such a, how can I say so? It was such contradiction in my life as an architect, and a Mies van der Rohe building was very much often more corporate, and then it didn't feel like a good library. So, and then we started to film, and we kept on filming, and it became almost, not for all projects, but especially from this one, especially this one. I think that it became almost part of my research. But also to communicate it again with the people in the Netherlands, or my own staff, the Mecanoos. Because how could I, or also what we did in Taiwan, I've been 30 times in Taiwan, but nobody else goes to Taiwan, or not that many. And it's a fascinating country. So for me, it's so I want to tell, and show it to other people. And maybe the filming is the new photography, maybe. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, we had an audience member note for that particular building that maybe you weren't positive about Mies, and I think it was really the space that you were describing. And they're asking what architects inspire you, past or present.
But to be honest, for me, to work on a Mies building is extremely inspiring. And I really, first I thought, okay, what's happening in this building? What's happening here? But I loved the building as the potential, how I could change it. And I started with my staff to visit almost everywhere I could his buildings. And of course, I'm from so there are buildings, of course, here in the US, but also quite many in Germany, what's next to the Netherlands. And I also did talk to other architects like David Chipperfield, who's also renovating, for instance, the building, the big museum in Berlin, and how they deal with it. So, to be honest, most of the other ones just bring it back the way it was, and that it was not good here in Washington. So I really, really needed to change it. But I would love that I would hear that what Mies thinks what we did, and of course also Martin Luther King. I hope they both will like it very much. And you asked me about other architects I'm always have been inspired by is Charles and Ray Eames, who I happen to have met in my life. The 50s work of Alvar Aalto, Lina Bobardi, the Italian architect who worked in Brazil, but also was very much influenced by the local people. And Mies really also became high on my inspiration level. Yeah, I don't know what's a good word. Mies became very important for me too.
Yeah. We have.
And don't forget Alvaro Cesar.
Oh.
Because maybe, as some of you know, that we worked with him when he was not famous yet. So we were his local architect for a project in The Hague. So he was working in our office and always sketching and smoking, but he's amazing. So he learned me, he freed me up, because I was a student at the Technical University in Delft, and you had to be always very logic. But I always, as you know me, I'm also like the more intuitive part or the more sculptural part. And he helped me when working with him together. He made me free. Yeah, so he was important for me, and I absolutely appreciate his work.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I do see all of those influences in your work. There's the gestural, and then the zooming into the materiality and the detail. And there's a question that one of our audience members is asking about that. They're very interested in the use of material in your projects. It seems as if almost each project you presented has a new innovative material palette. How do you go about selecting these materials and making sure that they are connected to the people, place, and purpose of the project?
Yeah, maybe, of course, the most extreme one is maybe the one in Taiwan, where we, after a journey of 2 years, trying to solve an issue, we at the end said, okay, let's make it with the local shipbuilding industry. What really linked it to that harbor city. And also, we also didn't link it to high-end shipbuilding, and not like a luxury yacht, but really like a cargo ship, and with the detailing of a cargo ship. But even now, because I'm seeing Anne, we're working now on the Trinity College, and we used to have in our design an aluminum facade, but the client asked us now recently, can you find a material what is more local, and it should be a symbol of sustainability, and it's a wooden construction. So we are now doing a whole brick research, but also try to find a special brick what they didn't use that much energy to bake it. So if you compare it, for instance, to the brickwork we did in Boston, and what is a kind of also linking, I called it, did I show the Boston project to you? But it's a very nice movie about, you can find it on the internet, about the Boston bricks with a Dutch touch. Yeah, you have to be aware that in our country there are no materials. We have grass, we have clay, and from clay we can make baked bricks. That's all we have, and water. So to do always this research, we don't have natural stone, we have nothing. So to find out every time how to make things is also a journey.
it's not always the easiest way. If you're more commercial architect, of course, you should do it in another way. But I totally enjoy it.
Yeah, and the tactile nature of your buildings, it really, like you noted that people come first, and you noted the hierarchy of the people, place, and purpose.
But maybe also that you have to be aware, I'm very much aware that maybe a lot of students don't like my work, because minimalism is much more part of what I know of a trend. But it's, yeah, and of course, if it's beautiful made, it's really amazing. But for public buildings, people don't understand that also. It's yeah.
And I think that's just it. Oh, we have one audience member that was applauding your commitment to public and public life. And they're asking, how do we as architects continue to support public life in the context of a present environment as we face increasing privatization and restrictions in public space?
Yeah, I think it's always important, we as architects, that we give inspiration to the public, but also to the politicians, and that we show them how things can be better, or what are the values, what we so we have. Yeah, I don't know. That's what I always try to do. That's why maybe also for me, photography or making imagination. That's the strength of our profession, we as architects, and I think we should really use that, not just for a glamour world, but have in mind. I always say, a father with a young kid. What do they need? And that was maybe for me, coming from the Netherlands, in the beginning quite difficult to work in the UK or in the US, that it's much more money driven often here. And I had to learn how to deal with that. How can I say this? Because now everything is on the internet. No, I had to learn. But I also, coming back now, working more in the Netherlands again, it's also now more money driven. So how can we, and of course money is always essential, and economics or whatever, but we should also really take care of what we make. Yeah.
So so you're really talking about the difference in audiences and clients and types of clients. And maybe this is a good segue for this next question about communicating your work. So this individual is asking, how does visual representation influence the design process or your design process? Does the image of the client play a key role? Otherwise, how do you convince them to believe and trust your approach?
Yeah, it's for me almost strange, this question. It's like, I think a lot of, maybe that's, I don't know how it's in your school, but maybe a lot of architects think that they have to fight with the clients. No, they're part of the team, and of course they're always the clients. They make at the end the decisions. So to take them with you, but also listen to them, and at the end it's their building. But again, again, we have the skills to give the imagination, or I don't know. And what is extremely interesting nowadays, of course, and we used to make many models or handmade models even, but what you can do now with all these computer renderings and the Revit, and it's amazing for the clients, but even it's also amazing for us as architects. It's really but it's always best to, I just want to stimulate architects, please travel, go and see things, experience them. It's so extremely important. Feel the building, feel the acoustics, how it's how are the sidelines, how is the daylight, because otherwise you think that you're living in a rendered world. It's not true.
Mm. So I think you've probably answered a lot of that even in this next question in that response, but how do you think one should approach designing a museum in the context of an urban city? What are important aspects that should be considered when designing?
I think, well, it's interesting, this question, but of course it depends on what kind of museum. But maybe, as you know, we're now working on the Boijmans van Beuningen Museum, what is a museum of the most important museum of my own city. I live in Rotterdam. And for me, it's very important with museum that it feels open and welcoming to everybody, that it is not elitist. And a lot of existing, even the old libraries, but even existing musea feel that it's not made for everybody. So we try to connect it much more and open it up to the streets, make a very, we even what we do in Rotterdam, we make even a routing through the building, what is possible there, what is free. You don't need a ticket for that. You only need the tickets to go to the exhibitions. We want to stimulate and seduce people to come in, because in the Netherlands you have to pay a ticket, not here in DC, for a museum. We recently, but it's still secret, so I won't tell you, won again a competition for a museum. And but also when I'm here in DC, I try to visit all the musea, because there are so many beautiful musea here. But I also look, what is the logistics? How do people enter? Do I feel welcome? Is it, you also should walk through a building in a more intuitive way. Is how often that the architecture is almost apart from the exhibitions. But for me, like what we did, for instance, in Birmingham, it's the architecture and the interior and the exhibitions are very much in a coherent way. And so that's
maybe this next question is a part of that response as well. They're noting that your buildings are very human friendly, and they'd like to know, how do you make sure that this is the case in very large buildings? With the increase in scale, it seems to become increasingly hard to create small scale, diverse and social implementations.
Oh, it's not just about scale. Again, here this is a huge library here in DC. It feels very pleasant. Yeah, it's also, a public building also needs scale. Of course, like, did I show you also the little chapel we did design for on the cemetery in Rotterdam? It's a very small scale, but and also when what I also try to do when I do a library, when we do a library, that we make, I sometimes say, different libraries in a library, because there's different people, the children library is something totally different from a teens library. Here we introduced a grand reading room. We have a fab lab. So there's really different atmospheres that brings them all together, and we link them with the monumental, beautiful stairs. So it's, and maybe that's also interesting. Like here, if you entered the building of Mies van der Rohe, of course, then you had this great hall, and that great hall, we had to keep it that way it was, because that was a landmark. But we adjusted one wall underneath this famous painting of Martin Luther King, and we made a setback that people could sit there, but also to improve the acoustics, but also to make it a little bit more friendly. Imagine a kid of 5 years coming in, or even you're 18 years old and you don't think, oh, I'm not intelligent enough to enter this building. That should not be the feeling. So, we play with that.
Yeah, and I love this emphasis on people and the sensual quality of spaces, engaging the senses. And we have one attendee that's asking about the poetic play of textures and forms for tactile, acoustic, and aesthetic purposes, and noting how beautiful and inspiring it is in your work. And they're asking if you could talk more about designing for the sense of smell and taste in your work.
Oh yeah, but just and I have a little bit checked my time. I don't know how many, but yeah, use your own senses. You know, it's everybody has senses. Use them.
Yeah. How are we doing time? How are you time wise? You've gone through 13 questions for us already.
Okay.
We've gotten a lot of. Do you have time for one more question, maybe?
Okay. Yeah. No, I just promised to be be somewhere else at a certain moment. But okay, ask me the most important one.
Oh. No,
it doesn't matter.
Okay. And maybe this is good for the students. Would you? This is a light question to end with. As the creative director of such a large company, do you still find time to design yourself? Would you like to be able to have more time for sketching and working out details, or do you prefer a role in which you direct or orchestrate the overall project?
No, to be honest, I'm very happy, and and also we are like Mecanoo's like 120 people. We also have partners and associate partners, so it's not just me. So we do it really all together. And I'm not the managing director. I have a financial director. You know, the organization gave me the freedom to really be visionary and to work on that level. And yeah, I also, a lot of students have this old-fashioned idea that if you have certainly an office, then you become a manager. But that's, I didn't be, of course I know to manage, I have to manage some things, but no, I'm extremely happy. And also, I always compare my office to a Mecanoo to a symphony orchestra. You know, we make all the music together. We need soloists. We need sometimes a small chamber size orchestra. We do it together, and together we make the music. You need all the skills of all these people. It's wrong. You can't do it all alone. Totally not.
Well, I think that's a good place to end with the questions, and I'd like to thank you very much. Your work has inspired me since I was a student, so it's been a treat for me to be able to be a small part of this.
Okay, thank you so much, Carlo.
I'll turn this over to George now.
Yes. Well, Francine, thank you for the wonderful both talk and obviously the many questions that we have. One of our members of our committee is a second-year architecture student, Kira Phillips, and I know that she wants to say something to you on behalf of all of us.
Okay.
Yeah, hi. I'd just like to say that on behalf of the students and faculty of our Department of Architectural Science, I'd like to thank you, Francine, for taking the time to share your progress and perspective with us today. It was definitely very interesting and inspiring, and I think we all really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
So this concludes our lecture this afternoon. We do have students who go on exchange to TU Delft, and some of them are actually in my studio this term, and I think one or two of them asked you a couple questions. So it's really wonderful to have this exchange between our university and your city and your country. And we're so grateful for the cooperation and the support of the Dutch consul, and certainly for your time this afternoon. We were expecting that you would be overseas, so that's why this lecture was scheduled in the middle of the day. But you're in our time zone, so we hope that you have a wonderful time and a safe time and a safe return home.
Yeah.
I'd like to just now say thank you to everybody for attending, and I wanted to make special thanks to the staff of our department, including Alexandra Berciano, Leo Reutman, and Michael Bartosik, who were very important in making sure that this event went off without any hitches. And I want to invite all of you who are here with us today to our next lecture on Thursday, the 19th of November. It will be in the evening, and we have invited Indian architect Annapurna Kundo, who will be speaking about her work. And so look for details on our website, and look forward to having you join us again. And once again, thank you so much, Francine. It's wonderful to meet you virtually, and we look forward to having you here with us in Toronto. Good afternoon.
And also, okay, thank you. And also be aware that your students are also welcome. If they're in Delft, come along in the office. We are close to the university. And even the Dean, Dick van Gameren of the Faculty of Architecture, is one of the partners of Mecanoo. So
even better. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All the best. And thank you, Anne, for being with us too.